You know, one of the things that I do remember the most is shortly before I got to Vietnam, our squadron had an aircraft called the C-2 Greyhound, and it had received what they call down status. There were problems with the engine and the airframe. It couldn't stand the stress of landing on an aircraft carrier. And so they had crashed a couple of them, and some people lost their lives because of it. And so the aircraft was given down status just before I got there. So then we were flying an older two-engine prop plane, reciprocating engines. And all the time I was there, we flew the older C-1 aircraft. The month after I got out, the C-2 got the status to fly again, and the very first flight crashed. And for the people that were killed, I knew all of them. My experience in the Navy was so much less traumatic than some of these gentlemen went through, and some of these ladies that were in combat. And I mean, I was in combat zone, but that's it. I wasn't in combat. I was very fortunate in that regard. I got out of high school and turned 18, and I actually waited. I farmed with my dad for about a year before I enlisted. I think the Join the Navy, See the World slogan kind of got me. And my oldest brother and my dad both were in the Army, and I don't know, I felt like doing something different, I guess. Thinking back on it, I really liked what I did. While I was in, I couldn't wait to get out, you know. But thinking back on it, it was a good growing experience, I guess you'd call it. Well, first was boot camp, San Diego, California. Then I had some schooling, they called it A school, in Memphis, Tennessee, where I studied to be a jet engine mechanic. And then I had about 2.5 years in Key West, Florida. And I was assigned to a squadron called VF 101, where we trained fighter pilots to fly the F-4 Phantom. I was given a job as a plane captain, and as a plane captain, my job was to inspect the plane and make sure all systems were functioning properly, and anything that wasn't functioning, anything that was broken, either had to be repaired right there, or I had to make sure it got to the proper shop to get fixed. When the pilot came out to fly, so you do a walk around with him and explain, you know, everything that had been fixed, and so they'd have questions for you, and if you couldn't answer them, you had to get somebody out there to make sure they got answered. But then you'd get the pilot all strapped in and get them sent out on their flight. When they came back, you kind of did everything all over again. You just start re-inspecting the plane, and any discrepancies that he found, you had to make sure it got fixed, things like that. And so I did that for about 2.5 years. And so most of my last year got spent down in Da Nang. And our job down there, I was a flight crewman down there. And my job was to load the plane with whatever cargo we had to take to the aircraft carriers. And mostly things like mail. We held a lot of mail for the troops. And one of the most exciting things I think I ever did was able to land on aircraft carriers and then take off of aircraft carriers, get shot off on the catapult and things like that. It's just a huge rush, especially for a 19, 20-year-old kid, you know. But an aircraft carrier is huge. I mean, those things don't rock too much compared to smaller ships, you know. The flight deck on some of those aircraft carriers is like 5 acres. Out of 4 years in the Navy, I spent one night on a ship, though.
I was wondering if you had ever been on the ship.
And yeah, well, you know, I landed on every carrier that was out there while I was in that part of the world, but the only time I spent on a carrier overnight was because we had some engine trouble. And so we had to wait for some part. I do remember one time, okay, so in Da Nang, we all had barracks. We didn't have to sleep outside or anything like that. And I remember one time waking up in the middle of the night and all the lights were on in our barracks and there wasn't a soul in the barracks besides me. And I couldn't figure out what happened. And I heard sirens going off. So, well, when the sirens go off, you're supposed to grab your socks and get out to the bunkers. So I go out to the bunker and all my friends are out there. Nobody woke me up. We had an air raid and I slept through it. Back and forth. Sometimes you'd be down there for a couple of months and then you'd come back to Japan for a couple of weeks and then you go back down again. You know, it's an honor to serve. I don't think many people get the opportunity to help their country that much. I don't think if you have a chance, I think it's something that is really good for you. I think it's better than a college education.